You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast, book lovers and fiction lovers, because we have someone very special with us today. We have Fiona Davis. Welcome, Fiona.
Oh, thank you for having me back.
And we especially love these authors who've been on BOOKSTORM Podcast more than one time, and that is Fiona. And we were just talking before the show. We remembered before she logged off last year, we had asked her what's on her radar, and she was talking about this amazing book that is out by the time you hear this podcast, These Spectaculars. So we're very excited to get the advanced reader's copy and talk to Fiona today. Listeners, book lovers, historical fiction lovers, and even if you don't love historical fiction, here is a great place to start with The Spectacular by Fiona Davis. But before we get started, let me give you a little bit of Fiona's bio because it's very cool. And a lot of times we love a certain author, but we don't know their backstory. And it's very interesting. So Fiona is the New York Times best-selling author of 6 historical fiction novels, all set in iconic New York City buildings. That part I love. Her books have been Good Morning America Book Club picks. They have been chosen as One Book, One Community Reads. And her articles have appeared in publications like the Wall Street Journal and Oprah Magazine. Now, I also love this about you, Fiona. She first came to New York as an actress, but fell in love with writing, got a master's degree at Columbia Journalism School. Wonderful. And her books have been sold now all over the world. So clearly, this is what you were meant to be. They are in 20 languages, and she still lives in New York City. Now, I just got to give a couple little shout outs because Kristen and I love this book, but so did a lot of other wonderful authors. Katie Quinn says, Fiona Davis just gets better and better. The Spectacular dazzles from start to finish. Yes, Katie, we agree. BOOKSTORM friend Jamie Ford says, another brilliant book from a brilliant author. This is historical fiction at its finest. Wow. And then we have Christina McMorris, who also is a friend of BOOKSTORM Podcast. And she says, Fiona Davis once again shines while spotlighting fascinating yet lesser known history of New York City. So true. We couldn't agree more, and we're thrilled to have you back.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for that lovely intro.
Well, Fiona, we're here to talk about The Spectacular, and I'm just going to give our listeners a little bit of the backstory of what's going on here. Of course, if you want to throw anything in at the end, by all means, and I'm not going to give away spoilers, which as usual in your books, it's a little hard to do. Now, your story brings us right to the heart of New York City in 1956. We meet Marion Brooks. She's 19, and she's about to get engaged to her high school sweetheart and embark on a life that her father sees for her, homemaker in the suburbs, maybe a secretarial role if she wants to work before kids, and importantly, a job for her husband-to-be at the father's company. Now, Marion soon feels a little trapped, and she's a dancer at heart. So when she comes across an opportunity to audition for the famous Radio City Rockettes, the glamorous precision dancing troupe, she jumps at the chance to exchange this predictable future for the dazzling life of a performer. Now, there's a few other developments going on in New York City that also serve as part of the plot. The city is basically reeling from a 16-year bombing spree that has been orchestrated by a person the press has called the Big Apple Bomber. The police have no real leads, and they turn to a friend of Marion's, Dr. Peter Griggs. He works at a local mental hospital, but he's developing a new technique called psychological profiling. So we see kind of it in its infancy playing out in your story. Now, Marion and Peter are pulled into the search, but she realizes that although she's supposed to blend in to the dancing troupe, to her father's expectations, she's going to have to stand out and take some risks to catch this bomber. But the consequences can be life altering and even deadly in your story. Did you want to add anything, Fiona, to that little summary?
No, you really nailed it. And, I think what's fun about my books is they're a mix of fact and fiction. So I interviewed a lot of Rockettes who danced there in the 50s and 60s and kind of drew from that in terms of creating my Rockette. And then for the Big Apple Bomber, he's based on an actual bomber called the Mad Bomber who just terrorized the city for 16 years. And so it's just finding these fun little things to play with and then putting them into a story. That's the joy of what I do. And I like to mention this book is kind of a mix. It's historical fiction, but it's also a mystery and a thriller and a romance. It's really all that in one.
I love it. And you have those details where we could tell that you interviewed actual Rockettes because it just had that real feeling of reality. And again, that depth that we love. So if you're ready, we can dive into the storm. I think Chris will kick us off.
Yeah, I agree. And I loved these little facts about the Rockettes from 1956. It took you in a whole other world. I am a lover of New York City. It's my favorite place in the world. I was mesmerizingly captivated by Radio City Music Hall in 1956 in the Rockettes. However, this was not really so very long ago. And you reminded us something that we need to never forget. Women were deemed fit to be basically homemakers, teachers, maybe nurses. The character Marion, who, by the way, we all loved, her father believed this was a perfect path for her. It was her best life, and that her dancer dreams and even her intelligence was nonsensical. And at one point, he even called her meddling. As the reader, I applauded Marion for pursuing her passion, even despite a lack of support. And I wondered, as the writer, do you believe with this character, Marion, and even with all of us today, should we pursue our dreams even if we fail? Does the courage to pursue your passion signify a victory in and of itself, even if it never comes to fruition?
It's such a good question. And, as you mentioned earlier, I came to New York as an actress. So clearly I'm a little biased. But, for me, my own personal experience was I went to college and I always loved acting. And I just thought, why not audition for an acting school? Let's just see what happens. And I got in, and then suddenly, there I was working and studying as an actress. And it was an incredible time for me. It was 10 years. I fell in with a theater company. We did so much work, really, really great work. It was a real collaboration. And my best friends today are my best friends from that time. And I came to New York as an actress. So clearly I'm a little biased. But, for me, my own personal experience was I went to college and I always loved acting. And I just thought, why not audition for an acting school? Let's just see what happens. And I got in, and then suddenly, there I was working and studying as an actress. And it was an incredible time for me. It was 10 years. I fell in with a theater company. We did so much work, really, really great work. It was a real collaboration. And my best friends today are my best friends from that time. And, it lasted for 10 years. Oh, I'm so sorry. Someone has to turn off their phone before they start. You can tell this is one of the early interviews,
Don't worry about it. We can edit that right out.
Right. And so, so I did it for about 10 years and then realized it just wasn't working for me anymore. And I never hit, we did a couple of shows on Broadway, but I never became, a guest star on a series or anything like that. And so it's a really good question. What do you want to attain from what you're pursuing? and what you'll be happy with. And for me, I would never give up that experience. I would never trade that, because everything I did since then was kind of pointing me in the direction of, oh, you should be writing books, which is not where I started at all. And I think taking that meandering view and exploring things and trying something new, we all live for a long time these days, and to do the same job for 70 years would be brutal. And so why not throw yourself into something that you're really passionate about and take a risk? And that's what Marion is doing in the book, for sure, is she decides to go for it. And back then it was much harder to do for a woman.
I love that you showed us how difficult it was for her. She went to a house that housed actresses, artists of all different kinds. And I loved when she entered there, people would be pursuing their craft in different corners. And I thought, what a different world from it is today. But I think the reader loved her courage. And I don't want to give spoilers, but whether she succeeded or didn't succeed, or whether she got the best position in the Rockettes, or whether it ever led to her fame, it didn't matter. We were so proud of her just for going for it. And I think it spoke to us today.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I agree that boarding house is based on one called the Rehearsal Club, which actually existed. And Carol Burnett stayed there, and Blythe Danner and Sandy Duncan. And can you imagine? I mean, to be there in the 50s and 60s with these up and coming stars.
Wow. Love it.
Oh, that sounds like so much fun. Well, your story also explores this idea of sisterhood in both actual sisters and in the women who were the Rockettes. Now, as the Rockettes, these women had to be a united team. They had to execute every single dance number with precision. But being a part of this incredible dance troupe was also empowering for them individually. These dancers developed physical and mental strength, something you really highlighted so well in your story. They were able to live independently, like at the boarding house you were just talking about, and at a time when it probably would have been very difficult for them to do that. Do you think the founders of this dance troupe understood the importance of it for women? Because it was kind of subversive in a way. On the outside, pure entertainment, unified, but behind the scenes, empowering individually. What do you think?
I think not, because when it was founded in 1925, it was founded by a guy named Russell Markert. And it was in St. Louis, and he just decided I should create a precision dance troupe. That's what the world needs. And so he started with 16 girls, and they were known as the Missouri Rockets. And they came to Broadway and did something, and then they became the Roxyettes, and eventually they became the Rockettes. So it was quite a transition from the 1920s to the 1930s. But what's so interesting is the Rockettes I talked about this sisterhood. When they talked about their time as a Rockette, you could feel the excitement and the energy and the love for the women and what they were doing. I mean, it just sounds like it was an incredible experience for women who, like you said, it was very hard to be independent, earn your own money, and be on your own. I remember talking to one Rockette, and she talked about one of her favorite memories was walking down the middle of Fifth Avenue in the middle of the night, singing at the top of her lungs, locked arms with her fellow dancers. And you can just imagine that in the 50s, what that would have been like, and that sense of freedom. And the testament to Russell Markert is that he was a really good guy. He really cared for the girls, as he called them, under his care. He took really good care of them. He made sure they were safe. They could go to him if they had any issues, and he would help them, problem solve, whether it was, a problem with a roommate or anything like that. And I think that helped. All the women I talked to just talked about Russell Markert like a father figure. And I think the way he approached it, just naturally in his human nature, was very generous and kind, and that transferred on to the girls.
Excellent. There was that respect that came through loud and clear, but it shows how important that was to allowing them to launch to that next level of independence. So
Yeah.
that was beautiful in your story.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple of Rockettes talked about how their fathers had to talk to Mr. Markert first before, and to get the okay, and then he would convince them, yes, it's safe, it's okay.
I
Yes.
believe it.
I loved it. I loved the way they had to stay in uniformity with each other so very strictly. And I just thought it was amazing. I've seen the Rockettes a couple times when I've been to Manhattan, and they're before a movie, before a film. I've seen them years ago, and they are amazing. In fact, I have a friend, I don't want to mention any names, whose daughter is a Rockette right now. And she loves it. And we're all so proud of her, but she's also using it as a stepping stone to maybe greater things, like Broadway or maybe a series or something. But I love this. We got to see the inside of the Rockettes here, which was very fun. But I want to talk about another character that I loved. He was a breath of fresh air, intelligent and honest, Peter Griggs. He was dedicated to helping persons with mental health issues at a time where we really didn't know a lot about this field. He spoke about the discovery of the double helix and genetic traits that can be passed down from generation to generation. He told Marion that her mother's poor decisions were not Marion's destiny, that our parents' good and bad choices do not always imply that we are DNA triggered to act the same. And I wondered, you as the writer, did you feel Peter's research was both freeing and binding, or maybe one of those? Should we today or back then even consider DNA when making our life choices in terms of mental health and physical health? It was such an interesting topic. And I wondered if you could expand upon your reason for the inclusion of it and its importance to the story.
Yeah, sure. I love Peter because he's such a scientist, and it's a good comparison to Marion, who's such an artist in many ways. So they're an odd couple, but also hopefully a good one. And yeah, I think when Peter's talking about that she's not bound by her mother's choices, it's not necessarily DNA, but more that kind of the trauma that's passed down from one generation to another, and how you tend to repeat what your parents have done, either in choosing a boyfriend or a husband, or or sometimes you do the exact opposite. And either choice, if it's not done thoughtfully, will backfire. And so for him, it's about, let's examine what your parents were. And then in that way, you're free to make your own choices and live your own life the way you want, without feeling like you have to uphold your mother's memory or your father's memory or their wishes. And in terms of actual DNA and sort of mental and physical issues, I think it's really valuable these days to have that knowledge. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's a few years ago, and I think it would have been great. And now, of course, they're coming up with great new research and new testing. It would be great to have known that might be coming. I might have made not many choices differently, but a few. And at the same time, DNA and knowing kind of, okay, this is in my family, or this is what might happen. It helps you plan ahead so that you start living in the moment. There's not a day I'm walking down the streets outside New York and I'm thinking, I am walking, I'm strong. This is a really good day. And to appreciate that, because, as you get older, things change. And so, yeah, I think it's interesting because in the book, I definitely explore those issues because that's what I was going through at that time.
Thank you for sharing that very personal story, because that's going to be very inspirational, I think, to a lot of our listeners and to Kristen and I too. Thank you. I thought there was something deeper going on there, and I wondered.
Yes.
Yeah, especially because that's such a great reminder to live with that knowledge every day. We don't have to wait for that diagnosis to live, as you were suggesting, with that appreciation and gratitude. So
yeah, it's true. And I'm lucky in that I have my symptoms are really minor. They're really easily controlled. And so, we're doing fun things like, all right, let's go to Egypt. And you start, taking risks and doing things that you might not otherwise, because you think, well, there's always time.
yeah, excellent.
I love how you're approaching it, because you could have taken the other side. I better not go. I don't know what will happen. And you're taking the positive side. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Good advice.
That kind of ties into my next question, because there's a theme running throughout your story relating to personal autonomy and the ability to choose aspects of your future. And here in your story, we saw a father who was making certain choices for his daughter because, maybe he thought he could protect them or that was the best thing for them. But we also saw a partner who chose to leave a good relationship to protect the other person from something that this partner was concerned about in his family history, maybe to save from future heartache. In that context, when adults are in a relationship, is it ever one person's decision to make for the other? Or is that something we should allow people to choose, even difficult things going forward in a relationship?
I love this question because it points out something that I hadn't realized, that in fact, in the book, Peter is doing to Marion what her father did, right?
Yeah.
Even though they're very matched as a couple, he's making choices for her without her, consent really. And I think, in any kind of healthy relationship, you need to be completely open and honest about everything so that everyone can make a decision from a position of strength. And in this book, in the book, it doesn't quite happen that way, mainly because that's just the way men's attitudes towards women were. And also the subject is, about family. And back then, family for a woman to have children was very important. And so, they're talking at odds here when they are discussing this. And so, yeah, that's a really good question, because I think she doesn't have autonomy. And so she's left with a great deal of heartache at not knowing what went wrong. And I don't know if that's part of the 1950s and kind of writing it set in a time period like that. But I think that can happen today too, where you just assume, well, this is best for him and I'm off. And is
Oh,
it?
I absolutely. In fact, I think that's a justification for people lying. I knew that that would hurt you, or I knew you'd be so upset. So I wanted to save you from that heartache by lying to you. I think you're
Yes.
right.
Yes, of course.
But I love that idea of autonomy really does turn on having a good understanding of the facts and freely making a decision, even if it's a wrong one.
Yes, absolutely. And we've all been there.
And we did really empathize and sympathize with Marion, who, as a woman in the late 1950s, all these men thought that they had to take care of her and make decisions for her and control her. And now, with women empowerment, now here we are, so much time later, we just wanted to say, go for it, do it, don't listen to them. And she did a lot of those things. She was a very inspirational character, and we really loved her.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's so interesting because I think it's so important to write about the past, because we may read it and think, well, that's crazy, just get up and do it. But you forget that women weren't allowed to have a checkbook or a bank account until the 70s. They couldn't have a credit card on their own until the 70s. And so there were all these limitations. And I think it's really smart to see how far we've come, but also how far we still have to go.
Absolutely. And that struck me very strongly because this was only 1956. It really wasn't that long ago. So we, as Kristen and I, are big believers in women empowerment. So we love a book like this that gets us a little angry and like, we want to go harder and work towards this. Very wonderful. Just a wonderful book. For our listeners, definitely The Spectacular by Fiona Davis. You're going to want to pick it up. You're going to love it. As Fiona said, it's not just historical. There's a mystery in here. There's some suspense based on true fact, which is really always fun. And so, Fiona, before we let you go, can you give us an idea? Now, we're excited now because you promised us something last time. You came through with it. What are you working on now?
Sure. So the trip to Egypt was actually part of research for a book that's set at the Metropolitan Museum. Wow. Yeah. And it's set partly in the Egyptian wing there, but partly at the Met Gala, which is the big party of the year that they throw with the costume exhibit. So it's a really fun exploration of the building and the people within it. And we'll see how it goes. Just early days still.
Okay. Well, I'm going to love that. Every time I go to New York, I go to the Met. And I'm not kidding you. I love the Egyptian wing. And also, I'm obsessed with the Met Gala. Who isn't? I mean, just look at the outfits. That's all. Just
right. We've got mummies and glamour, so it's really a perfect mix.
We
I love
cannot
it.
wait, cannot wait. Okay, so if readers, you're going to want to connect in the meantime with Fiona Davis, and you can find her on Facebook, on Instagram, or you could visit her website, FionaDavisBooks.com, where you can sign up for her newsletter. Thank you so much. So great to see you once again,
Oh,
and we'll see you again next year.
oh, I love it. Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute joy.
Take care.
Just love all of these historic books. I love what Fiona is doing by taking real pieces of history and working them in with some fiction, because there's a lot of truth in there and you feel like you're learning something, or you've stepped into the past somewhere, like you're a little fly on the wall, somewhere that you're normally not allowed to be, or weren't destined to be, and you still get to be there. I just loved it.
Well, you just love the New York connection as well, because she
Everything.
always does focus on some cool aspect of New York City that
Mhm.
you may have passed it a million times and not realized the depth of the history behind that building, or, maybe the people that worked there or started it.
Mhm. Now, I love
Mhm.
what you brought up about profiling, because when I read it in the story, you know how we all know the word profiling today, but in the story, it was the very beginning of the whole concept of profiling.
Mhm.
And the doctor who had been researching it was looking to find the guilty party in a crime. I don't want to say any more than that. And he was so right on in so many areas because of this profiling. I found it fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. I actually would love for her to incorporate that in a future book, because first of all, you were seeing the discipline be born. This was the first time that they started taking seriously these aspects of looking at the criminal mind. But more importantly, today we've got to be careful, because a lot of people hear the word profiling and they get upset because it does have that negative connotation.
Mhm.
However, the real aspect of profiling does relate to statistics and numbers and looking at habits and drawing conclusions from evidence. And that kind of profiling is useful. It has proven time and time again to be a very good tool for law enforcement. So we've got to make sure that we're separating improper profiling based on prejudice from profiling that's based on evidence.
I agree. And so when we hear the word profiling today, instantly I think negative thoughts, but it just goes to show how something very good that was started for very good purposes can be misused and turned around and abused and used for something bad. And I just thought that was pretty cool. And also, I have to just go back to your other question, because this is happening still today, even though we wish it wasn't. In a relationship, for one person to decide, this is not healthy and I'm doing this for your good, not mine. We've all heard stories like this in our own lives from friends or, relatives, and people who have broken up from a relationship because the other person thinks, I'm not good for you. And what did you say? You said something very smart and witty about this, because you dove down deeper and said, maybe that's not the real reason.
Oh, absolutely. First of all, I think if somebody tells you I'm not good enough for you, so I'm doing this for your own good, you should believe them. As you and I always talk about, people tell you who they are. So believe them when they say I'm not good enough for you. There's probably something in them that is not yet ready to be in a committed, mature relationship. But I also think that maybe people blame that, it's me, not you situation, and make those decisions to exit a relationship. So I think we've got to evaluate when we hear from people, I'm protecting you, I'm making this decision for your good. There's a couple layers that you might maybe want to start thinking about there, none of which are great. So
Mhm,
I don't
mhm.
know. What do you think?
I agree. So if someone's telling you, I'm not good for you, and you don't really know why, maybe we don't want to find out why. Maybe we need to listen and say, okay, whatever it is you're hiding there. Okay, bye. See you later. The last thing, there's so many things I could talk about, but the last thing that really hit me, and I love that Fiona is doing it, and thank you to her for sharing something so personal. It's not always easy to do, but it speaks to people when you're honest, is chasing your own dreams despite whatever your shortcomings or uh, fears may be, and going for it. And whether you reach that dream or don't, everybody watching you is going to be cheering you on and be proud for you. It almost, Kristen, am I right or wrong in saying sometimes it doesn't even matter if you reach that dream? The going for it speaks maybe louder than the final prize.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I was going to ask you about this in a second because, you know, a lot of times we know women who are around our age or who have had a career and they think in terms of, I don't have any dreams left, or I don't know what those dreams are. And I think the whole point is we're always in a different season and a new season is just around the corner. So start thinking about what are some of your new dreams? You know, it's not like you're born with dreams and then by 20, those are the only dreams you're ever going to have. When you're 50 and you're 60, there's new experiences and aptitudes and gifts that become apparent. So develop new dreams. And I love that in the story we saw a woman who had obstacles, and that is the culture of the time, a father who was heavy-handed, other men in her life maybe that weren't as supportive, and she went for it. She may not have succeeded in the way that she thought, but that leads kind of to new dreams and different dreams. So I say never stop losing sight of the fact that we can move in new directions, even if we're 60, 65, 70. And we've had plenty of authors on the show, both men and women, who have had multiple careers, who started writing in their 50s and 60s, and have had a whole new world open up to them that they didn't anticipate. Those
Mhm.
are dreams that develop along
Definitely.
the way.
It's a difference between existing and living. And I have friends who are in their 80s, 90s, starting new careers, new businesses. I watch them thriving, and I think that's how I'm going to be. I'm never going to stop dreaming, living, pursuing, acting, doing, going for something, even if it's difficult. Why would you? Why would you stop? It's great advice. Maybe that's the key to longevity. I don't know, but I'm doing it. So, listeners, thanks again for joining Kristen and I. We just love having you here talking about these wonderful novels. We're going to give you a few storm predictions to pique your interest. We have Madeline Martin, The Keeper of Hidden Books, Bryn Turnbull with Paris Deception, Katie Quinn and Janie Trang with The Phoenix Crown, Ellie Banks, aka Maisie Yates, One Little Spark, Matthew Quirk, Inside Threat, Marie Benedict, Victoria Christopher Murray, The First Ladies. We have Viola Shipman returning with Famous in a Small Town. Ashley Audrin, The Whisperers. We have Sandra Brown returning with Out of Nowhere. We have Greg Hurwitz, The Last Orphan. And we have the first children's book we've ever had on the show because we adore it. It's by Tiffany Hammond, and it's called A Day Without Words.
Oh, I can't wait to talk about all of those books. So, listeners, as Chris mentioned, we continue to grow every week. We're so grateful. Thank you for sharing our links and for listening to these authors and really engaging in this discussion with us. We just love it and we're very grateful. And of course, we ask that you stay on the radar with Bookstorm. You can visit our website at bookstormpodcast.com. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok. And of course, if you want to find us on YouTube, you can see us and these amazing authors and just look for Bookstorm and podcast, and we should come right up. Until next time, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.